What's up, boot campers? I hope you guys are having a fantastic day. My name is Alex. I'll be your host for this video, and this is the how to construct the dental school list with DAT Bootcamp. Let's get right into it. Firstly, you're going to need a few things to sort of get started. You're going to need to know what your GPA is, both your cumulative and your science GPA, as well as your biochemistry and physics GPA separately. You're going to need to know what your DAT score is, and obviously if you do not know your DAT score, you could still sort of follow along with the webinar and see what kind of schools appeal to you. You're going to need to know what kind of reference letters you have. Do you have science reference letters, non-science, a dentist, research, things of that nature, to ensure that we're meeting the requirements of every school. Similarly, we need to know our total shadowing hours. So if you shadowed in multiple dental offices, you're going to have to make up a total. You're going to need to have your transcript and your grade report to also know that you're meeting all the requirements of every dental school program that you are applying to. So once you have all that, let's move on. So what are some factors that you could consider when you're applying to a dental school? Consider the cost. Cost is, obviously, if that's important to you, look at your in-state school. Those are going to be low cost. Look at schools that offer in-state tuition after first year. So obviously that's going to save you a lot of money. Cost is a big factor, as a lot of these schools or dental schools, they're costing over $400,000 or $500,000. And so keep in mind that it's obviously going to take you several years, if not decades, to pay that amount of debt off. And so you want to have some sort of a plan going into those schools of how you're going to pay off the debt. The location of the school, are you okay with moving to, say, a colder climate or a warmer climate? Do you want to be close to family? So if that's important to you, consider that as well. Whether the school is in-state, out-of-state, or international friendly, obviously the schools that are in-state for you are going to be good for you to apply to. You have a higher chance of getting an interview and an acceptance at those schools. Also, the out-of-state friendliness of schools. So obviously some schools are more out-of-state friendly than others. I always use the example of Texas schools, as they are notoriously unfriendly towards out-of-state applicants. And if you look at their percentages, it's roughly 3 to 7% acceptance rate for out-of-state applicants, which is very low. The prestige of the school, right? So if you're going to those top tier schools, those Ivy League schools, you always have that prestige, that brand image behind you. The curriculum of the school, is it a medical school curriculum? Is it integrated in any way? And so you want to sort of figure out what kind of curriculum the school follows. The grading scheme, so is it an honors pass-fail? Is it just a pass-fail? Is it just purely GPA and rank? One thing I really like about Penn is that they rank the top 10 students and everyone else is number 11. And they sort of have a hybrid grading scheme where they have the lab courses are pass-fail and everything else is regularly graded. The technology and facilities at the school. So are they using brand new up-to-date technology, or are they still sort of stuck in the past several decades? Like, do their CEREC or CAD/CAM machines, do they look like this? Or are they much more newer and they look something like this? That's sort of important to me. I want to use the latest technology. I also want to be in a renovated building or a renovated environment, something that's more updated. So that was kind of important to me. So you want to do your research on that part as well. Get a feel for the school's culture and their environment. Obviously, if you're going to be in those Ivy League schools, I think that's a great environment. Everyone there is going to be top-notch. Top-notch students are going there from all over the country. And so you have like that sort of a unique environment. The school's mission, see what the school is trying to accomplish. Are they more community service oriented? Are they more into research? And sort of try to see if maybe there's a fit for you within certain schools. Also consider accelerated dental school pathways. So what I mean by this is that some schools will actually allow you to go into their dental school program after your third year, so you don't necessarily have to complete your bachelor degree. And so I know a couple schools that do this. I believe Nova does this. University of the Pacific also does this. So for those of you who are still thinking of applying to dental school, maybe in a few years, this is something that you should consider, as it could save you a lot of time down the road and a lot of money. Essentially. So a few other additional factors to consider. So as I mentioned earlier, ensure that you have the credit requirements prior to your application. Some schools will actually allow you to apply in your second year, right? So that way you can apply after you finish your third year. Make sure you're meeting all prerequisite requirements. Most schools are going to allow you to sort of complete your prerequisite requirements prior to matriculation. Other schools want to see a certain amount of prerequisites complete prior to your application. I know, for example, Pittsburgh wants to see the majority of your prerequisite courses complete prior to your application, and so you'd have to reference the exact amount from them. Also consider how they sort of grade DAT retake scoring. So do they just look at the highest score? Do they do a super score? So what this means is that they take your highest score from each section over all attempts. So if you say in the biology section you got an 18, 19, and then a 22, they're going to take the 22. And so that's obviously can work in your favor. Do they look in the most recent score, regardless if it's the highest or the lowest? And this information can be found in the ADA Official Guide to Dental Schools. So this is where you find the necessary information. So the ADA Official Guide to Dental Schools is a great resource for you guys to reference. It has like all the stats, how many offers of admissions they gave out, how many interview offers each independent dental school program gave out. That's all in there. You want to talk to current students, reach out to them through SDN for the Dental School Interview Bootcamp Facebook page. Contact the school directly, get some information from them. The AdStats portal has a little bit of information that you can reference. Additionally, I also wrote a How to Get into Dental School guide. I wrote unique characteristics about each dental school. I walk you through the whole process from all the way building up your application to going through the interview cycle, taking the DAT, going through the interviews, and I gave a lot of my secrets and tips on sort of how to ensure you have a successful application cycle. Anyways, here's a list of schools that give in-state tuition after first year, just for your reference. Once again, laws may change from year to year, so it's still important to sort of follow up with these schools to ensure that the information that you are receiving is up to date. Those are UCLA, UCSF, University of Connecticut, University of Florida, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Texas A&M, Texas Houston, Stony Brook, Maryland, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Rutgers University in New Jersey, Buffalo, Ohio State University, Texas San Antonio, and the University of Washington. Now, the reason I put an asterisk beside the University of Maryland and University of Washington is because it's a little bit harder to get in-state tuition at those schools, so you may want to look deeper into that. Anyway, so how do you go about making your school list? So I would recommend getting the ADA Official Guide to Dental Schools or just using my guide. I have updated stats in there as well for you guys to reference. So you're going to come up with a list of 20 schools initially. I think this is a great starting point. And these are going to be based off your important factors. And keep in mind that every school that you select, you should be okay attending that school. So let's say you only got your only option and it was at the bottom of your list. You should still be okay with attending that school. You obviously don't want to be going to a school where you're going to be miserable. So keep that in mind when you're selecting schools. You want to include several schools that are reach schools and safety schools. And what I mean by this is that reach schools are going to have academics, average academics that are higher than yours, and safety schools are going to have average academics that are lower than yours. So for example, if you have like a 20 academic average, a reach school for you would have 22 academic average, and a safety school would have like a 19 or an 18 academic average, something along those lines. Keep in mind that a safety schools never guarantee an interview. They just sort of increase the chances or likelihood of you landing an interview or gaining an acceptance. Keep in mind that the majority of the schools that you're going to be applying to are going to be within one academic average of your stats, one academic average, and probably 0.1 to 0.2 difference within your GPA. So if you have like a 3.5 GPA, within your average, you're looking at around like a 3.6 to 3.65 to 3.4, 3.35. Something along those lines is rough guidelines of what's within your academic range. And also ensure that you meet all the requirements. You don't want to be putting schools on the list if you don't meet, like, say, prerequisite requirements. If some schools require like biochemistry and you haven't taken biochemistry, then obviously you're not going to be eligible to matriculate into that school unless, of course, you take that prerequisite course in the future. So keep that in mind. So once you've compiled your list of 20 schools, you're going to move on to the next step, and that's further research. This is where you dig deeper into every single program. So for example, when I was selecting Penn, one thing that I really liked about them is that the students, they told me that they only get one exam a week at most for pretty much the most part. One exam per week, that's where they keep it at. And that's something that I really like. It works to my strengths. I can focus on one subject at a time. So there's that, instead of getting like a week of where you're getting 6 exams at one time thrown at you. And obviously that's something that I don't really like. So that was very appealing. And obviously you're going to find this information through deeper research, through talking to students, maybe calling the school, like that. You want to get feedback on your list, so post your list on the DAT Bootcamp's interview page, post it on SDN, try to get as many people to give you input about your school list, just to ensure that you're making a good decision. And as I mentioned, you're going to reference that additional data, calling the school and such. So after you've done that, Your final school list should probably be in the ballpark of around 8 to 14 schools. I think that's a good number to sort of stick to. You want to ensure they have a well-balanced list. So for example, if you may have really high stats, and so you're applying to those top programs, you're applying to the Ivy Leagues, you're applying to like UCLA, UCSF. Those are very, very competitive programs. And so there's no guarantee, regardless of how high your stats are, that you're going to be getting into any of them. And so you want to ensure that if you're applying like top heavy, you sort of have schools at the other end of the spectrum, should you not get into one of those schools that you really want to go to. And so once again, you're going to get feedback to ensure that you're making a good school list again. So moving on, let's take a theoretical example now. So here we have Bob. Bob is happy. He's applying to dental school this year. So let's take a little bit of criteria about Bob and see what kind of school list we can come up for him. So first things first, Bob is a resident of Ohio. He has no criminal record. He's got a 20 academic average. It's balanced, 3.6 cumulative and science GPA. So he's pretty much your average applicant academic-wise that got into dental school. He's got 2 science reference letters and a dentist reference letter. He's in the biology program. He has 100 hours of shadowing, 400 hours of volunteering experience. He's a vice president of a pre-dental society. He tutors high schoolers. He works at a restaurant as well. He's an athlete. He's in karate. He's competitive. So let's see what Bob came up with. So this is Bob's initial list. So I just put the stats up here for our reference and the reference letters over here. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to sort of think things over. What do you see wrong with this list? So we got the University of Puerto Rico, University of Michigan, Ohio State University, Case Western Reserve University, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Loma Linda University, and the University of California, Los Angeles. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to sort of look at this list. What do you think that Bob can change, maybe improve, get rid of, things like that? So first things first, the University of Puerto Rico teaches in Spanish. So if Bob doesn't speak Spanish, he'll obviously not be able to go to that school. Additionally, it's very out-of-state, unfriendly. However, it does have a very low cost of attendance, the lowest in North America. So you want to maybe keep that in mind as well. But that's probably not a great option for Bob in the first place. The University of Michigan is a huge research university, and so they really like to see research. Bob doesn't have research, so maybe another school would be a better fit for Bob. Ohio State University, I think that's a great option for Bob. It's within his academic range, and he's also in state for that school, so a great school for him to apply to, especially if cost is a big factor. Case Western Reserve University, another great school for Bob to apply to. It's within his state. It is a private school, but private schools, for the most part, still sort of favor slightly in-state applicants compared to out-of-state applicants. Nonetheless, if he wants to remain close to his family, that's another great school for him to apply to. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. This is a school that heavily favors in-state applicants, and so out-of-state applicants have a very low chance of getting admitted or receiving an interview. So it's probably not the best option for Bob to have this school on his list. Loma Linda University is a religious university, and so in order for Bob to apply to that university, he would need a letter from a religious leader, and he does not have one, and so that's not a good school for him to apply either. UCLA is another, is obviously a top program. Very competitive school. They like to see research as well. If Bob was to apply there, it will be a big reach for him. And so maybe there's a different school that will sort of fit his sort of needs better. And so let's see what a better school list would look like. Keep in mind also that Bob only applied to 7 schools. And so that's sort of on the very low end of the amount of schools that you want to apply to. So I would probably recommend that Bob apply to a few other schools. So here's like an updated list of schools that Bob could apply to, what a good list for him would look like. It has a good mix of reach, safety, and schools within his academic range, as well as schools that are sort of offer in-state tuition after first year on the cheaper end, and things like that. So let's go through these one by one. So Ohio State University, as I mentioned, great school for him to apply to within his academic range, and he meets all the requirements. Temple University, another very good program. It's in Philadelphia in the state of Pennsylvania. Very strong clinical program. I think they have the second largest patient base in the country, with NYU being the first. So there's that. It's also on the cheaper side of out-of-state schools that don't offer in-state tuition after first year. Case Western Reserve University, a good option for him to apply to, especially if he wants to remain in the Ohio State location. UCSF, that's a very, very good school, a top program. It has a pass-fail curriculum. It will be considered a reach school for him. It's a very competitive program, but nonetheless, I think it's a better school to go with compared to UCLA if that's what Bob wants to do. UOP, great school. I interviewed at the school. I loved it. It's completely brand new. They have a new building, so great school in that sense. It's also the only 3-year program in North America, making it very unique in that sense. And so I definitely think it's worth a shot for Bob to apply here, especially if he wants to be in California. It's in 3 years. He saves the year. It is very expensive, but then again, you're saving that 1 year. And so it's up to you to sort of decide what's a good option. But nonetheless, it will be a reach school for Bob, and I think it's a solid school for him to apply to. The University of Maryland offers in-state tuition after first year, although it might be a little bit difficult to get. Nonetheless, it's within his academic range, so a good choice for him to apply to. Midwestern University in Illinois. This will be considered Bob's safety school for sure, definitely because it has lower academics than what he has. He meets all the requirements, so a good school for him to apply to. It is very expensive though, so keep that in mind. The University of Nevada, Las Vegas, great program. Offers in-state tuition after first year. It's within Bob's academic range, and so I think it's a solid school for him to pick to apply to as well. Same story with Buffalo, in-state tuition after first year within his academic range. Great school to apply to as well. Creighton University, what makes this university unique, pardon me, is that you do not need an interview to get accepted into this university. So there's that, and it's probably a safety school for Bob simply because it has all academics that are lower for him. So another great option. University of Detroit Mercy, all the way here at the bottom. Solid program. Obviously, it's in Michigan State in Detroit. Has a strong clinical program. You're going to see a lot of very interesting cases in that school. So I would say this is a nice list. Has a lot more programs than the previous one, and so it's pretty balanced in that sense. Let's go on. So we got another example for you guys here. This time, let's take Alice. She's a resident of Florida, no criminal record, 22 academic average, 3.7 cumulative and science GPA, 2 science letters, 1 non-science letter, and 1 dentist letter. So she's pretty much covering the bases at most schools by doing that. She's in the chemistry program. She has 100 hours of shadowing, 400 hours of volunteering experience at the food bank, tutoring. She also participates in a few college clubs. She's involved in dance, and she has research. So obviously, very well qualified applicant. So let's take a look at Alice's initial list. So once again, remember she had a 22 academic average and 3.7 cumulative and science GPA. So she's applying to the University of Florida, Augusta University, University of California, Los Angeles, Nova Southeastern University. This is located in Fort Lauderdale in the state of Florida. Midwestern Arizona, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, the University of Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Boston University, and Columbia. So what do you think is wrong with this list? What do you think Alice can change or maybe construct better? Give you a second and let's go on. If anything, you could just pause the video at that section and you can go on to here afterwards. So the University of Florida, I think that's a great option for Alice to apply to. It's her in-state school, so obviously she has a higher chance of getting admitted there. It's actually a very good program as well. Unfortunately, I don't think Augusta is a good choice simply because she does not meet the shadowing requirements. She only has 100 shadowing hours, and at the University of Augusta's dental school requires 200 shadowing hours, so it makes it not a great fit for her because she's obviously going to be rejected on that premises. The University of California, Los Angeles, great school. They like to see research. Alice has that. She's within the academic range. It's a top program, so it is very, very competitive to get into there. However, nonetheless, I think it's a worth shot for Alice to apply there. They also offer in-state tuition after first year, if you remember from the previous slide. However, keep in mind that they like to see their secondary application complete within 3 weeks. Nova Southeastern University, another great school. It's located just north of Miami in the state of Florida. So if Alice wants to stay in the state of Florida, honestly, another very solid program. Midwestern University in Arizona. So this school focuses on general dentistry. They follow a private practice model. They gain a lot of their patients from a nearby city called Sun City, and a lot of their patients are elderly. So there's that. They also place implants at that school. This will be considered a safety school for Alice, as all the academics are below her academic range. The University of Nevada at Las Vegas, another solid program for her to apply to. They offer in-state tuition after first year. If cost is a big concern for Alice, she could go ahead and do that. The University of Pennsylvania, obviously, it's an Ivy League university, very competitive. I think that's a great school for Alice to apply to as well. They also offer a lot of financial aid. Keep in mind that for the reference letter requirements, they require any 2 letters or a composite letter package. However, if you're a science major, they want to see science letters. I think that's a great school for Alice to apply to. As I mentioned, a very unique school. They offer selectives, dual degree programs, things of that nature. Solid program for Alice to apply to, although very, very competitive. The University of Pittsburgh, let's see, I think that's another solid program for Alice to apply to. Keep in mind that they have that limit of, they want to see at maximum 1/3 of your undergrad being done at a community college. Nonetheless, solid program for Alice to apply to. They are, I believe, probably the cheapest out-of-state tuition school, so a good option. Boston University, that's probably going to be a safety school for Alice, although it's a very nice program as well. Something unique about them is that I've heard on numerous accounts that if you're admitted to multiple programs, you should obviously let Boston University know. They're known for giving out scholarships to people who have multiple acceptances if they really want them. So keep that in mind when you're applying. Columbia University, obviously another solid university, is part of the Ivy League, like Penn and Harvard. The problem is Alice does not have 3 science letter requirements, so she does not meet the requirements there. She has only 2 science letters, so if she wants to apply there, she would have to acquire a 3rd science letter. So this gives us a little bit better idea about each of the schools here, and some changes that she would have to make. Nonetheless, I think the amount of schools that she's applying to is reasonable, so perhaps she has to take away Augusta University and Columbia University and sort of adjust some things there. Nonetheless, let's move on. So some things to remember when you're applying to schools. Recall that schools accept applicants with a very broad range of scores. And so just because a school has higher academics than yours doesn't necessarily mean you're out of the running to get into those programs. So let's take a look at just 3 random schools that I picked. The University of Kentucky, which has the academic average from the 5th to 95th percentile as a 17 to 22. Cumulative GPAs that are sub 3.0 all the way up to almost a 4.0. And the same thing with science GPA that are sub 3.0 all the way up to almost a 4.0. And so as you can see, universities accept students with a very broad range of scores. So keep that in mind. Just because you have lower academics doesn't mean that you're out of the running for those programs. Even a school like UCSF, a top tier program, very competitive program, accepts students who had a 19 academic average all the way up to a 26. And this is only the 5th to 95th percentile. So perhaps there's students that even got lower than this. Same thing with GPA. They had students who had sub 3.0 GPAs in both cumulative and science, and they were still admitted into the program. So just something to keep in mind. The reason we focus so much on academics and all these numbers is because they're easily understood. Everyone understands what the 21 academic average is, what a 3.5 GPA is, and that's something that we can easily compare. But how do we quantify the experiences, the interview, the personal statement, the secondaries we write, right? This is essentially what adcoms have to do, and obviously it's a pretty difficult job. So keep that in mind. So what do admissions committees look for? I won't go into too much detail, but I'll give you some insight into what happens behind the scenes. So admissions committees look to build a class, right? They look for a well-rounded class versus a well-rounded applicant. Because if you were to ask the average person on the forums or somewhere else, they'll obviously, most of the time they'll tell you we're looking for a well-rounded applicant. But that's not necessarily the case because admissions committees, as I mentioned, are looking to build a class. And so they look for people who can complete their class and who can fulfill their mission statement. And so perhaps you want to think about specializing versus generalizing. And what I mean by this is maybe you want to pick a few areas on your application that you really are going to go deeper into. So perhaps you're going to have a lot of community service involvement. Maybe you're going to go really deep into research. And so that way you sort of you stand out in the certain areas of your application in a sense. You can think of the process as a coach building a team. You cannot have a team if everyone is playing defense or if everyone is playing striker. You're going to need a certain number of strikers. You're going to need a certain number of midfielders, a certain number of defense, and a goalie, right? So keep that in mind as you're going through the process. Let's go through one more example. Let's take Martin. Martin is a resident of Arizona. He's got an 18 academic average. It's balanced. A 3.4 cumulative GPA, a 3.3 science GPA. He's got 2 science letters, 1 non-science letter, and 1 dentist letter. He also has that religious letter. He's in the kinesiology program. He worked as a dental assistant. He's got 500 volunteering hours. He's been on mission trips. He's worked at the community center or volunteered at the community center. He's volunteered at the support society, volunteered at the dental office, volunteered at the hospital. So as you can see, even though Martin is a below average candidate for matriculating to dental school, he has a very deep or rich application in the sense that he's been involved with the community a lot. A lot of community service is shown on his application. So that's something that to keep in mind when you're applying to dental schools. Maybe he wants to focus his application and applying to dental schools that sort of cater towards community service. So let's take a look at what kind of schools Martin can apply to. So first things first, what I want to mention is that there's only 11 programs here. If I was Martin, I would probably apply to a few more, add a few more schools. And you'll also notice that the majority of these schools here also focus on community service. So we're sort of matching the school's mission statement to what you see on Martin's application. And we're trying to get as close to his academics as possible to sort of maximize the chances of us getting an interview and getting accepted into the school. So we can go through Western University. It's although it has a higher academic average than his, the GPAs are, although it has a higher academic average than his, the GPAs are lower. Same thing with AT still. We're trying to get as close to his academic averages as possible. Midwestern University, University of Nevada, Las Vegas offers in-state tuition after first year. It will be one of his reach schools along with the University of Detroit Mercy. Midwestern University in Illinois is as close to his academics as we can get. So there's that. He can apply to Loma Linda University because he does have that religious letter. You can apply to Marquette University, Roseman, Creighton University of Missouri, and you'll notice that, as I mentioned, a lot of these schools focus on community service. So these are just a few schools that Martin can consider applying to. Additionally, you want to follow up with schools of interest. You want to continue being involved in experiences, continue learning new skills. You want to send your schools academic updates as you complete maybe summer semesters or fall semesters. Send them an academic update, update your AdSAS portal, send in a new transcript. Let the schools know that you're continuing to grow and improve. You want to send experience updates, so maybe, and you want to send them strategically, right? You want to send them in like early November, right before offers of admissions are giving out in early December, things like that. Anyways, I'll follow up with this in a future presentation to sort of give you some tips and tricks on how you can maximize your chances of getting an interview and getting an acceptance. And keep in mind that the cycle isn't over until you get into one of your top choices. Okay, so a few things to note. Don't obsess over one school. Don't put all your chips down essentially on one program, thinking that it has to be this one program and that's it. And so that goes along with saying don't neglect your other options. Treat every single interview that you get as your only interview. And that's probably the best way to go about things. Take your time with secondaries. Secondary applications are very important. So as I always mention, some schools may look at secondary applications first before even reading your personal statement or looking at the rest of your application. And so if you're completing your secondaries within a few days, you're probably doing something wrong. Apply strategically. So if you're one of those applicants who use DAT Bootcamp and you got those high academics, that high DAT score, and you're thinking of applying to the Ivy League and all these top tier schools, if you're going very top heavy, add more schools at the other end of the spectrum, as I mentioned. You want to keep that in mind. You want to have a balanced list. Consider the out-of-state acceptance rate, right? As I mentioned, those Texas schools have very low out-of-state acceptance rate. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill also has a very low out-of-state acceptance rate. Keep that in mind when you're applying. That way you're making a very informed decision. The in-state tuition after first year is very big, especially if cost is a big concern for you. Keep that in mind and don't settle. Keep persisting, but be reasonable. That's the advice I can give you. So thank you very much for listening to this presentation. DAT Bootcamp, we are active on all of our social media platforms. On our Instagram, we have the Mnemonic of the Day segments. We got Question of the Day segments. Same thing goes along with the Twitter, with our Facebook. We have new videos on YouTube all the time. And if you want to follow the company, we are also active on LinkedIn. Everything is at DAT Bootcamp. So thank you and have a wonderful day.